All right. Welcome back to the Homefront Live. Take two today. Everybody, my name is Reed Galen. It is 1 o'clock in the East and it is 10 o'clock in the West. Thanks so much. Today, I am flattered and honored to be joined by Chris Goldsmith. Chris, welcome back.
Thanks, Reed. Great to be here, man.
So if you guys don't know, Chris is a veteran, a fascist fighter. You can see he's got his T-shirt there, Veterans Fighting Fascism, Task Force Butler Foundation. He has been all over. He has seen it all. Today, guys, we're going to talk about a couple of things, but the basis of it is going to be something that Chris wrote right around a week ago, actually. The U-Haul Nazis are grooming kids. And so, Chris, take us a little bit through this piece, what it is, and I want to also talk, because you have such a unique experience about this, about how this sort of, the process of this sort of radicalization takes hold and what we have to do to break out of it. And then also want to talk about how, they've just decided to give $180 billion to ICE, making it like one of the largest military or armed formations in the world. But let's start with these U-Haul guys in their khaki pants and their masks and their hats and all that.
Yeah, so I put U-Haul Nazis in the headline because I think more people recognize the image than they know the name of the organization. A few times a year, usually on holidays that are either have a theme related to racial justice or patriotic themes, 4th of July, Memorial Day, or Labor Day. A bunch of generally young neo-Nazis from their teens, 20s, 30s, primarily, rent a couple of box trucks. They show up in a random city unannounced. They all jump out, they march through the streets, and then they jump back into their U-Hauls. In the meantime, they might assault a few people. They'll shout racist and anti-Jewish and homophobic slurs, and then they're gone. And this has left a lot of people feeling really frustrated. Like, we have got, it's one thing during the Trump administration to not have the feds fighting Nazis. I think we're all going to assume that's the status quo. But that's been the case under the Biden administration too. So what the piece is it talks about how neo-Nazis are exploiting what we now call the male loneliness epidemic. And they are using that to groom not just young men, but children. So that includes through things like TikTok, Instagram, gaming platforms, Discord, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the type of thing that I have to give some credit to Meta. Meta has been pretty decent about, I think, automating a lot of, getting rid of these things. But TikTok, which is my top app, it's what I use for most of my content, has really not done anything, despite multiple public reports that identify the exact accounts that these neo-Nazis are using to recruit and groom children.
So the 4th of July, I was talking to a guy, I'm sort of an acquaintance, and a Republican, but not a MAGA guy. And he said, Chris, that his son, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what he said, but his son came in one day and said something that was so outrageously misogynistic and racist that it just blew the guy away. And he said, "Where did you hear that?" And he said, "Oh, I saw it on YouTube." And I think the kid was like 8. And so take us through how this process begins and how insidious it is, because as you noted in your piece, you mentioned the apps. It could be games like Roblox, right, which are incredibly popular. But take us through why. Why do you start with an 8-year-old? What benefit does an 8-year-old's attention have for these goons jumping in and out of a Ryder truck?
Yeah, so if you can hear the dogs in the background, I apologize.
They don't like neo-Nazis either, and God bless them for it.
They do. Yeah, I've got a 90-pound pit bull just waiting for one of them to try and come into the house. So, so the reason why they target kids is because, these are people who believe in like race science, right? Everything goes back to breeding, reproduction, race. Um, the core of all of these white supremacist conspiracy theories and everything that informs that movement is the idea that white people are being erased. That's what the Great Replacement conspiracy theory is, and the core of that is always anti-Jewish. It is the belief that Jewish people are bringing in people of color to replace white people. So you'll see. I think a lot of people are familiar with some of the slogans and the symbols that these neo Nazis use. Among the most popular online are 1488, which is 14 words, is a reference to creating a future for white children. That is like, I'm not going to say the whole slogan, but it's a white supremacist slogan, and then 88 stands for Hail Hitler. So everything about whether it's Hitler's Nazism or modern day Nazism ultimately boils down to influencing children and controlling the future that way.
Well, and so you mentioned the young male, the white man loneliness problem in the United States, but when we look back at 1920s Germany, when you had the brown shirts, the SA, a lot of these young men, not unlike yourself, were veterans.
Mhm.
Or were facing a world that and that was a different time and a different place, obviously. But why does the white guy loneliness epidemic roll around every so often? What is it? Is it cyclical? Is it a matter of circumstance? Does it just happen to happen? I mean, I know in your own story, you get out of the military, you go to community college, and so many of your classmates and fellow veterans recognized what was happening to you. But why does it continue to happen? Is it the chicken or the egg? Are the white guys lonely and the bad guys see it, or do the bad guys go looking for the lonely guys and make it worse?
It's both. It's both. So most people, when they hear what I do, wearing a shirt that says Veterans Fighting Fascism, they assume, they're like, oh, well, veterans are more likely to be radicalized because of PTSD, or because of their Republican leaning beliefs that they joined the military with, and that's why they joined the military. And there may be aspects of truth to that, but troops and veterans are targeted by the Republicans for the same reasons that the racists and the Russians are targeting them, and that is the same good reasons that J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America target us for recruitment, because we're valuable members of a team, no matter what environment we're in.
Mm.
So when it comes to the male loneliness epidemic for veterans, yeah, there's the struggle that many of us go through when we leave the military, kind of readjusting to civilian life, losing that brotherhood, the sisterhood, the family that you are not just working with, but you're training with to go to war. Sometimes you do go to war. You live in the barracks together, right? You're roommates. So it's beyond a work relationship like you might experience in the civilian world.
Sure.
But broader than that, what it boils down to is we live in a culture where men are not encouraged to feel comfortable getting help. We have lost, as you and I have discussed at length before, we have lost our third places.
Mhm.
With the loss of third places, we have lost the valuable mentorship. I talked about this before. I was a Cub Scout. I was a Boy Scout. That is a mentorship program, and that program, over the last couple decades, has kind of failed to modernize. But it was good for me. And today's kids just don't have that kind of thing.
Well, I think too, whether or not, I mean, and if they do have it, I think about when I was on the road a couple of weeks ago, Chris. I was in New Jersey, I was in Pennsylvania, I was in Virginia, and every one of the hotels I stayed in was just filled with families for travel sports,
Hmm.
right? Which in and of themselves, okay, it's fine. But then you see these stories too that even those places where they should be the hubs of camaraderie and teamwork and leadership are now, hyper individualized. The parents are out of control. The boys are, and even the girls, right, are pushed beyond their limits. And so even those third places where, like, I played baseball as a kid, right, like,
Yeah.
that was very formative for me because this is going to shock everybody. I was sort of a punk kid, right? And it was my coaches and my teammates that said, you're an okay ball player, but you're an asshole, right?
Hmm.
Like, it would be better if you were a better teammate. And being a better teammate means getting out of your own head. And I think that there's too little of that now where, we're atomized, where, everybody's got to be John Wayne. Everybody's got to be, every man is an island, which we all know, of course, that except for probably guys like you and a few like you, most of us would not survive in the wilderness more than about 8 hours, right? And so much of that too is a it's not a societal breakdown, but it is a societal failing.
Yep.
Which is there aren't enough places where you can go and they are positive, if difficult, right? You mentioned the military. Like, the military is not an easy life.
Hmm.
But you do build that camaraderie, because also if you're in combat, it's existential, right?
Yep.
The guys to your left and right, and behind you, right? Like, if you're not helping each other out, then you're all done for.
Yeah. And one thing that to get away from of just kids, I think broadly speaking, our culture, there is there's not merit to the way that MAGA does this, but I think we should be very conscious of the fact that uh, we have made young white men feel unsafe. And there are times where maybe that's appropriate. But if you talk to young men, you find that they're living in fear. They're living in fear of saying something wrong, of doing something wrong, and having their whole life destroyed. In a way that when I grew up, I was born in '85. Like, yes, the internet existed, but not everybody was on social media from the age. Social media didn't exist when we were kids, right? But from a very young age, kids have this tremendous, overwhelming fear of being canceled, right? Now, some do uh, do something wrong, and they get blowback, and they never recover from that, and that turns them into a monster. Others just turn into a monster because they fear everyone, right? Um, but others, live with this fear, and they are targeted by white supremacists who say, no, you shouldn't be afraid. You are powerful. And instead of in a healthy way teaching them what healthy masculinity is, they exploit the fascist idea, which is, anyone tries to define fascism, you're gonna get a million different ways, right? But the core tenet of fascism is a mythological belief about the nation or the people from the past, and a belief that we can return to that. So what these Nazis, what these fascists from groups like Patriot Front will do is they'll target these young kids and they'll show them the imagery of, um, what they consider white history. And they'll say, this is the greatness that you were born to achieve. And if you just join us, we will educate you on how to achieve this. Meanwhile, all of these white supremacists are fucking losers, aside from a handful like Elon Musk and Stephen Miller, none of them ever accomplish anything. But we now live in a world where people who are informed by these beliefs, like Elon Musk and Stephen Miller, uh, are are taking their fantasies and making them a reality, and causing real harm to the people that they have always perceived as enemies, whether that's people of color, the LGBTQ community, immigrants of any kind, women, you name it.
Well, so let me ask a different question, because I understand what you're saying about the sort of young men feeling disempowered, and I understand that. Um, but I also want to go back to some research done by a guy named Bob Pape out of the University of Chicago, that he really started in the immediate. I mean, I think he's been doing it for a while, but he really came to prominence after the January 6th insurrection, where he showed that many of the men, mostly white men, that had gone to the Capitol were not young, economically disadvantaged, but were guys my age. They were professional. They were white. They had a means to get there. They had a means to stay somewhere. They had the ability to buy thousands of dollars worth of battle rattle and radios and all that other stuff. So, what I am seeing, just amongst my cohort, Chris, are a bunch of guys for whom the world still works. But now it's like this weird, almost Nietzschean thing that they have to go, because they don't have anything to fight against, that they now have to go invent that thing.
Yes. Yeah, and that is people aren't talking about it as much anymore because it's not in the news, it's not necessarily as relevant. But the QAnon movement didn't really go away. Like the so, I've been Facebook friends with General Flynn since he got picked as DNI back in 2016, right? I sent him a Facebook friend request and he accepted. So I've gotten to watch that version of crazy metastasize for almost 10 years now. I've gone to QAnon events where I watch um, this combination of political beliefs, conspiracy theories, and religion collide and form one um, form one thing that takes over these people's lives. And part of the reason that I used to, you know, screamed from the rooftops about the dangers of QAnon is because these are adults. These are middle-aged and older people, the vast majority of them. They are more often than not, they have a lot of resources. And you would have, I went to Branson, Missouri, the weekend before Election Day of 2022, where General Flynn organized a QAnon conference. There were, I think the venue might have held 3,000 and there were something like 6,000 people there. I mean, packed. And they had Kash Patel, now FBI director, up on stage with guys like General Flynn. And they had people coming up and speaking in tongues and people speaking, telling the audience, thousands of QAnon believers, that they are speaking the literal word of God. Like God is speaking through them in that moment. And you had former, retired military officers, again, invited there by guys like General Flynn. So given that credibility of someone with his name recognition, his background, who go up, and I'll never forget this phrase because it was an applause line. He says, there's like a libertarian flair there. And he goes, I tell everybody you need to invest in precious metals. And I don't mean gold and silver. I mean brass and lead.
Right.
And people got out of their seats. This is a conference where people are spending hundreds of dollars just for a ticket. They are renting RVs and driving across the country. They can afford any weapon that's on the market, and they are buying them because that is what these QAnon freaks and General Flynn is still out there are encouraging them to do. So yeah, they are every bit as dangerous as the neo-Nazis inspired by white supremacy.
So let's stay on this idea of we talked a minute ago about the third place, but I want to bring that forward into the idea of the almost the mobile third place, which is, or the monthly third places. Turning Point USA does this. CPAC does this. You talk about Flynn, and then evangelical, almost militant churches. It's every Sunday. When I say the other side, let's call it pro-democracy, pro-decency. We don't really have that. There's, you can come to an event, but there's a list of things like, are you for us with this? Are you for us with that? There's not a single overarching sort of message that breaks through. And that's one thing. Maybe it's because it's almost completely homogeneous.
Hmm.
right? As far as race is concerned, it's almost completely homogeneous, as you said, because of it's almost all men. And even CPAC, right? CPAC for years, when I haven't been in probably over a decade, was always focused on getting as many young people into the seats, Chris, as they could. They gave
Hmm.
them free tickets. They all spent, there were 4 or 5 of them to a hotel room. They made everything they did everything they could to reduce the amount of friction to ensure that thousands of young potential converts or already converts could get more bathed in the blood. And so I guess now let's talk a little bit about the solutions to these things. And I know in your piece you do that. How do you start to create a situation where there are places to go, where there are voices for these young men to listen to? Because I have a hard time believing that it's just original sin. You're born a
Yep.
white guy in America and you're evil, right? Like there's still more, per capita, probably more white guys in the country there are anything else. So writing them off into totality seems, you know, bad for society, bad for the economy, bad for the future. So how do we create those places and those spaces for those younger men and frankly guys my age to go?
Yeah. Yeah. So Veterans Fighting Fascism, my nonprofit, our biggest project right now, in the context not just of U-Haul Nazis running around, on the holiday weekends, but
Right.
of ICE coming into towns and terrorizing people, like militarized police, doing presence patrols like I used to do in Iraq in full kit. Like we are living under an authoritarian regime. So my focus, and we've talked about this before, is getting people to start their own clubs. In our case, it's the Anti-Fascist Book Club. So I built,
Mhm.
and people can find it on veteransfightingfascism.org. I built a guide for people to start their anti-fascist book club. Now, not everybody wants to read, and that's not the point. Just because it's called a book club, the point is to give people all of the tools that they need, and I give people instructions for the first 6 meetings, and after that, you don't need me. Of like, here's how you engage with recruiting people. Here's the first couple books that you read. I don't care if you do it at a library or if you do it at a bar or a coffee shop. Make that place yours. Go there and you don't have to be with friends. Go on your local Facebook town group and say, "Hey, I'm doing this." If you've got one thing in common and it's that you want to read the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, like that's all you need in common. You don't need you don't need to have grown up together, right? So what I want to do is inspire people to be willing to get out of the house, make new friends, and do it in the context of we're living under an authoritarian regime. If you're going to read these books, you already believe that. Um, and after 6 meetings, I hope that these people are looking into like what's the schedule for the school board? Are they going to go there and see if Moms for Liberty is in the room trying to fucking get books banned? Because when fascism comes, doesn't just come from the White House, it comes from the grassroots. So everybody needs to make sure that they're fighting fascism in their backyard if they actually want to stop
So let's bring these two things together. You mentioned ICE.
it. Hmm.
The connection there's a weird connection here. Um, there's two weird connections. One is the masks. No, they all claim to be so tough, but none of them want to show their faces.
Hmm.
The second is ICE has now got $180 billion budget based on this Trump bill that just passed, which makes it amongst I think maybe Chris, the top 10 or 15
Yep.
largest armed organizations in the world, right?
Yep.
Ahead of most countries' militaries
Ahead of Israel,
and
which
ahead of
has
Israel.
jets and
Right,
right.
jets and nukes and all sorts of
Yeah.
other things, right? Um, but my friend Garrett Graff wrote a great piece about this. Is like, where are you going to find the people to fill out these ranks?
Hmm.
And the truth is, and you might have experienced this in the military, is that they will necessarily have to reduce the
Hmm.
background checks, the competence, whether or not that's intellectual, psychological, anything else, to just fill out the ranks. And as you do that, and we have seen this in the past, the level of violence goes up, the level of corruption goes up, the level of professionalism plummets. So
Yep.
take us through how these two things sort of come together.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked about this. This is actually what I think my next Substack piece is going to be about, kind of a warning of what ICE is going to become. Um, and people ask, we have like a fight about John Fetterman saying like you shouldn't criticize ICE, you shouldn't say you should abolish. Trump is going to abolish ICE. Trump is going to destroy ICE. I can guarantee that because it is going to become as infamous as the SS. I can more or less guarantee that if Trump
But
stays in
before you
office.
continue, just take us
Yeah.
through what that looks like from your perspective.
So I was 16 when the towers fell, right? So that's Afghanistan kicked off in 2001. I graduated in 2003. Before I graduated is when the Iraq War started. So I turned 18, joined the army. I go through a year of basic training and then being with the unit for training before going to Iraq. When I got to Iraq in 2003, excuse me, when I got to Iraq in 2005 in OIF 3, back when they used to count them that way, people were realizing, oh, this is going to be a long fucking war, and no one was joining anymore. So all of a sudden, the incentives had to go up.
Ah,
All of a sudden, the bonuses had to go up. And as the bonuses are going up, the standards have to go down. So now they're
right.
bringing in people who, maybe didn't graduate high school, or they have a criminal history, or they have um, uh, disabilities that, otherwise should make them ineligible to serve because they're not compatible with service when people's lives are on the line. We saw this. We I didn't see it, but during the Vietnam War, they did the same thing. They lowered standards dramatically. We had the draft back then, so they started drafting people who had something like a life expectancy of 15 minutes because they were not fit to serve. And they were so not fit to serve, they weren't just a danger to themselves, they were a danger to everyone around them.
Right.
So, in the context of what ICE is now, in the mind of Americans who are paying attention to the news, and not every American is, but in the mind of Americans who are paying attention to the news, ICE is either purging the undesirables, they wouldn't describe them that way, or they're becoming the Gestapo, right? They're either the good guys getting rid of criminal aliens, as they would describe them, or they're the Gestapo. So you're not going to get people joining ICE who think they're the Gestapo. You're not going to get anyone who has a conscience, anyone who has any hesitancy to wear that brand, to become affiliated with that organization. So you're only going to get the racists. And, people have asked me, uh, after Trump won in November, like, what the fuck are you still chasing Nazis for when we've got, Nazis in office? Well, who the fuck do you think ICE is going to be recruiting from? It's going to be recruiting from the hundreds, thousands of men who I've been studying, following, reporting on for, for 6 years now. It's going to be the most racist, the most radical men who are going to get into ICE. And most of these men that I have studied, that I have reported on, that I have publicly exposed for having committed things like violent hate crimes, they haven't paid any repercussion. So if they have no criminal history, there's certainly no likelihood that ICE is going to screen them out. So
Right.
we I have a lot of people whose heads are in the right place, in the progressive space, in the anti-hate space, whatever, on the donor side, who doesn't isn't necessarily close to it as me, asking like, why are you still fucking chasing Nazis? Because they're gonna be ICE as soon as they're 18. They can sign up, and the standards are going to lower, and ultimately, ICE is going to become. If people watching this video don't think they're the Gestapo now, give it 2 years.
Well,
Give it 2 years.
and you take the single-minded insanity of somebody like a Stephen Miller and the bullet-headed insanity of somebody like a Tom Homan, um, and I had Miles Taylor on a few weeks ago, Chris, and he said that for Trump, Trump used to refer to the Insurrection Act as his magic powers, right?
Hmm.
That he could use the Insurrection Act as his magic powers. Now that could potentially precipitate a military intervention, which we've already seen in Los Angeles. But with a group like this, you don't need the military,
Hmm.
right? Why bring the military into it if you've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Patriot Front wannabes, guys like so many of the people that you have seen, and our friend like Dan Barkoff and
Hmm.
Ken Harbaugh have documented in these different documentaries about guys who didn't have a chance to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, either because they didn't want to or because they were too old, or they went and they didn't get combat experience,
Hmm.
and so they felt like they missed out on something. And how many militias are out there, right? In places like northern Idaho, or so many places, that are looking for the opportunity, and looking to be frankly deputized,
Yep.
right, to go out and do this stuff. And then it becomes, what we've seen this 100 years ago. We saw this in the aftermath of World War I. The federal government deputized a lot of these kinds of people, and they went around, they lynched people. They
Mhm.
murdered people in cold blood. They did it all with a federal badge. They did it all with a federal gun. It's forgotten because we have the collective history, remembrance of a goldfish, but we have seen this stuff before, not only in Germany, as we've talked about, but we've seen it here,
Yeah.
right? This is not new. We've seen it in the 50s and 60s in the South. These things are not new, but for some reason, humanity has to repeat its own mistakes to remind itself what it doesn't want to become. The problem is it doesn't stop. It doesn't get activated. It doesn't wake up until those things have already begun.
Yeah. And we saw this with Elon Musk. Elon Musk didn't have the traditional Secret Service protection that someone who was, you know, a pseudo cabinet official would have, right? The Secret Service or the U.S. Marshals deputized his private security.
Mhm.
That is normal now in this country. The Overton
Right.
window about who has the authority of the federal government has blown the fuck off the frame, right? I I have been so frustrated for years after January 6th, everyone worrying about Donald Trump and the Insurrection Act. I've been involved in these war games, and everybody obsesses over the Insurrection Act. You don't fucking need first of all, the Insurrection Act allows Congress to put a leash on the president. If he never invokes it, there's no leash. And why would he need to deploy the US military when he can just start deputizing any of the militias around the country? If
And
you
we
keep
saw that in the Brennan Center stuff we did last summer.
Mhm.
When I was sitting next to a former head of the Marshal Service, he goes, "I don't know why they bring the Pentagon into this. We do it all the time." So I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's I it uh the like intellectual exploration of like what are we going to do if this law gets invoked, but like none of that fucking matters. ICE agents right now are indistinguishable from private militias, from unlawful militias, from the three percenters, from the oath keepers. They wear all the same fucking patches. None of them have a consistent uniform. They all carry the same hardware, the same weaponry. So, like I live in New York State. If I see someone with an M16, a proper AR-15, I know that is a law enforcement officer because that style of rifle is illegal in New York State. But just about anywhere else, you cannot assume that because someone's carrying an AR-15 that they are a law enforcement officer. And just because they're wearing an ICE badge that's got Velcro on it that you can buy on Amazon for $2, you know, how are you supposed to be able to tell that they're ICE? They're wearing masks. They're not showing badges. So we have crossed the Rubicon. We do not know today. We do not know today that the videos that we're watching are ICE agents. They could be
And
private. They could be private security. They could be, pulled from another agency. They could be fucking prison guards for all we know, or they might be members of private militias. We would not have a way to tell the difference.
Well, and I mentioned this on a previous video, but I saw a reel on Instagram of these people apprehending he looked to be I don't East Asian. I don't know if he was Chinese or Japanese or
Hmm.
whatever, but it looked like Los Angeles. But Chris, the one thing, these people were not cops, right? Like cops have a way of looking, they have a way of operating. These people were like they were overweight. They had like the cargo pants and all this stuff on, and they're like got the guy up against the wall, and then they're wrestling him around, and then what do? They throw him into like literally the back of a rented like Nissan Sentra, right? And
Hmm.
then they drive away. And it would be ludicrous, except for the fact, like, where did these people come from? Who rented the car, right? Who's paying them, right? I
Yep.
mean, are we into another Blackwater situation, right? Where there's going to be these black contracts that no one's going to know about, or maybe actually now, you know what? It's been appropriated. They can pay whoever they want, and they're never going to know. And then let's not even get into the idea of before we even talk about how many people they're going to hire. Let's just talk about how much money is going to be stolen off the top of
Oh
all of
yeah.
this, right? As they recruit these people, as they find, because they're going to have to go find people to recruit these people, right? I doubt ICE is going to do it by itself
Yep.
because they don't have the capacity for that. And so it just tumbles out into this thing where now, to your point, who are these people? And I saw another video. There were people yelling at there were agents. I'm going to put that in quotes. And
Hmm.
what does the guy in the passenger seat do? He gets out, he's masked up, and the first thing he does is he pulls out a 9 millimeter and he points it at the crowd.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I've known enough law enforcement officers to know that if you feel personally threatened, you can use lethal force. If you're a sworn law enforcement officer,
Yep.
right? My fear, Chris, is that this guy, if he was a cop, was poorly trained. But if he wasn't, one day a guy like him is going to get out of the car and he's just going to pull a trigger,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And then all bets are off.
Yep. And bringing it back to what you just brought up earlier, like the standards are going to be lowered. The emotional intelligence of recruits for ICE is going to be falling because they're not going to be able to screen people out. They're going to have a mandate like the Army does, like the Army did for the troop surge in 2007. In 2007, George Bush flooded Iraq with soldiers. The only way that that could happen was if they just opened the fucking floodgates and let everybody in. I was in the Army to watch that happen, right? The same thing happened in Afghanistan later. It is the quality of the service member in that case, or the law enforcement officer in what's coming, is going to drop, and with that comes trigger happy idiots who otherwise would have been screened out. But the difference is the mistakes that were made, you know, during my deployment, they happened far from where social media existed. They happened
Right.
where there were no cameras. This time, and this type of trigger happy shit will happen. This time, people are going to see it. Americans are going to see it immediately. And like Blackwater, I don't know if people remember this, but Blackwater like killed a bunch of people at an intersection. Instead of firing warning shots, they just started shooting people, right? There was a huge fucking trial that went on for years. These guys basically got off.
Was that in
The
Pakistan?
No, that was in Iraq.
Iraq, right?
So uh so like the Blackwater types, they've got a relationship like what's her name? Fucking DeVos's brother,
Yeah,
Prince,
Eric
Eric
Prince.
Prince. Like Eric Prince has a good relationship with the Trump administration. You think he's not in line for a fucking ICE contract? We're gonna
Right.
have Eric Prince's fucking stormtroopers running around kidnapping people. Because logistically, there's no way to expand ICE enough. And you have a bunch of battle hardened, trigger happy fucking mercenaries that we've been sending around the world, not just during the Trump administration, but America's been sending these people around the world, and very soon they're going to be contracted to do the same shit on the streets of the United States.
Right. And unfortunately, my fear as we start to wrap up here, Chris, is that it's going to have to happen before otherwise. And when I say disinterested, I don't mean that they don't care. It's that otherwise normal Americans who are still able to live a normal life on a daily basis. It's going to have to take that before they wake up and say, wait a second, what's happened? What's happening here? And
Yep.
by then, they might very well be too scared to say anything. And that's the normal human reaction, is to say, if the difference is going out on my front porch and screaming at a bunch of guys who are gunned up, and potentially getting shot, or looking out the window and hoping they just walk by, the normal reaction is hoping they walk by.
Yep.
And that's a hard part, and that's how all of this stuff that sort of cascades into something worse. Okay, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you, obviously, going back all the way to 2003, but really for the stuff that you've been doing in the last few years. And I've gotten to see a little bit of it and gotten to know you. And I think I first took notice of you. I think that movie War Game just got bought by somebody.
Yep.
But the reason I took notice of you, just to give you a little bit more love before I send you off to your weekend, is because you were the only one in the whole movie who, after the exercise was over and everybody was so self-congratulatory, you're like, you guys still don't get it. You
Yep.
still don't get it. Because I believe you were the head of the red team, right? So you were the head
I
of the
was,
bad guys. Yeah. That was why, that was the thing. Like, I knew some of the people on screen personally, but then I saw you and I was like, wait a second, that's the guy.
Yep.
Always go with the guy who's saying the different thing, not the same thing. So where can folks find your organizations? Where can they find your work, and where can they find you on Substack so they can subscribe?
Yeah, so I wear a bunch of different hats for the nonprofit side. Task Force Butler Institute is what trains veterans in open source intelligence research. We're the ones who find evidence of criminality by these extremists and hold them accountable in the court of law. Veterans Fighting Fascism is public education focused. That, if you're interested in the Anti-Fascist Book Club, that is where you can find your guide. Um, my personal Substack is On Offense. The theme is like, listen, if everyone liberals want to sit around and play defense on democracy, we're going to fucking lose. That's why we're here. We need to impose costs on the enemy, or else we lose by default. And finally, the newest thing is the Find Out podcast. This is a bunch of dudes who met through White Dudes for Harris, who have come together to start a conversation about how to bring men back into the Democratic Party. We're trying to encourage, both men to engage healthy forms of masculinity, and for the Democratic Party to recognize that they can't win elections without people who look like me.
Well, listen, thanks for all you're doing, Chris. As always, gang, you can find me here at the Homefront. I hope you'll subscribe. You can also find me on the Homefront podcast. And for the for the folks who are looking for a little bit something more political in nature, please go to jointheunion.us. We're also working at the community level, trying to get folks out of their houses to those third places. And guys, I don't care if it's a pizza party, if it's a meeting at the library. If you can do something, do it, right, guys? Our friends and neighbors are going to need more help than ever, right? Look, this is what I need to say, right? Work with the person beside you, help the person behind you, right? Like, that's what we got to do. I hate to say this, no one is coming to save us, but that's the opportunity, Chris, we have to make sure that we can and will do the things we need to do to save ourselves and save this great country of ours. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you and yours and that little one you now have a safe and healthy weekend. Everybody else, be safe out there. Do what you can. Be a better person tomorrow than you were today. And we'll see you later.
Thank you, brother.